Hey comic book fans, Kevin Given with you once again. If you love comics as much as I do, you're going to subscribe to my channel. I review comics for Comic Crusaders. I also have my own franchises, Adolescent Radioactive Samurai Platypi and Carl Vincent Vampire Hunter. They're available on Comics Central, Indie Planet, and Comixology. Check them out. Stay tuned to this broadcast for more information. Also, like the Facebook pages for each franchise for more information. Check out my Patreon site for some neat original artwork and shows that you won't find on YouTube. And this week on Comics Let's Talk, I'm going to talk about my feelings that this could be coming up on the end of an era of superhero movies. Now, I grew up watching reruns of the old George Reeves Superman TV series, and then after that came Adam West's Batman. Then there was pretty much nothing except cartoons. I did have cartoons back then. There's an old Spider-Man, Super Friends, stuff like that. When TV purged black and white programming in the 70s, the black and white episodes of Superman were left behind. And even though the later seasons were filmed in color, for some reason the entire series was left behind and no longer syndicated. And it was the same with Batman, even though Batman's entire series was in color. Well, at least those shows weren't shown in any capacity where I lived. All I had at the time was The $6 Million Man, Bionic Woman, and Wonder Woman. They would have to fill my cravings for live-action superheroes for the time being. I was also an avid reader of Marvel Comics and was so hoping that these characters would come to television, or the movie theater, or both. But alas, I would have to wait until my childhood was almost gone before seeing a Marvel character come to live action, and that would be the old Bill Bixby, Lou Ferrigno Incredible Hulk. So to compensate, I cast superheroes with actors from that day in my head. For instance, my Fantastic Four consisted of Russell Johnson, who was the professor on Gilligan's Island, Vic Moreau, who starred in Combat, Tuesday Weld from The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis, and teen heartthrob Bobby Rydell, who sang the big hit Wild One. They were my Reed, Ben, Sue, and Johnny, respectively. You can imagine my delight when the first Christopher Reeve Superman hit the silver screen in 1978. Finally, I thought, there's a successful superhero film that's made a ton of money. Surely Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, and the Avengers would soon follow. Not to mention DC characters like Batman, Wonder Woman, since she had her own successful TV show at the time, and The Flash. That wasn't to be either. At least not in the immediate future. It would take 11 years before they adapted Batman, and the only Marvel movies made around that time were a low-budget fare like Dolph Lundgren's The Punisher and Matt Salinger's Captain America, which only barely resembled their comic book counterparts. Then finally, in the late 90s and early 2000s, we would see Marvel characters come to the big screen. Blade, Spider-Man, and the X-Men. This led to the current superhero renaissance that we now see as big-budget superhero films are released every year. Most have some degree of success if they're faithful to the source material. However, there are some that tank due to a filmmaker's ignorance of the source material. Catwoman, Fant4stic, Dark Phoenix, to name the lowest end of the totem pole. Of course, I'm no longer a kid, and even though I enjoy these movies today, I would have been so happy to have movies like this when I was in my early teens. I was so thrilled with Superman the movie that I saw it a dozen times at the box office, and it was one of the first movies I ever owned on VHS. But now, as we approach 2020, we've seen the peak of the mountain, with the MCU dominating the superhero field and DC lagging behind. Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor leading the forefront of today's superhero movies, which has led to the massive Avengers franchise, which is now over. Yes, I'm sure there's going to be more Avengers movies, but they won't be the same. Tony Stark is dead. Steve Rogers is old. And Thor's fat and can't deal with the destruction of his home world. After all, who could? Now, there's still hope for Odinson. He can lose weight and snap out of his depression. Cap could always come back, and so could Tony, since characters die and come back to life all the time in comic books. However, I can't help but think if they did bring those characters back cinematically, it would feel like cheap cash grabs after the finality of End Game, and the movies would not have the same feel anymore. Then there's Spider-Man. Finally, here's a hugely popular character that was done right with Tom Holland in the lead role. Though not the money makers domestically as the Tobey Maguire version of the character, it's still a comeback after the weak box office performances of the Andrew Garfield films. But as of this writing, there's some question if the next Spider-Man films will be part of the MCU, since Disney and Sony are not seeing eye to eye. I personally feel that they will reach some kind of an agreement. Sony can't create Spider-Man films without Sam Raimi that have the appeal of the MCU version, and I believe they know this. The only hope I believe they have without the MCU involvement is if they were to bring back Sam Raimi, and I don't know if Raimi would come back without the now 40-something Tobey Maguire in the lead role. And now we're heading into Phase 4 of the MCU, and I admit I'm feeling underwhelmed. The Doctor Strange sequel is going to feature Elizabeth Olsen's Scarlet Witch, with Kevin Feige promising diversity and pandering to woke politics. I'm getting the feeling that Stephen Strange is going to play second fiddle in his own movie. Now, all you SJWs out there, understand I have nothing against the Scarlet Witch. I love the character, and I like Elizabeth Olsen's take on the character, but why doesn't she get her own standalone film? Does Marvel feel that she's not ready, perhaps? Now, I hope I'm wrong, and that Doctor Strange will be the star of his own movie, but we'll see. Then there's Thor 4. I was ecstatic to hear of another Thor film, and I found out they're going to give Mjolnir to Jane Foster as they did in the comic books. Again, SJWs, I have nothing against Jane Foster becoming a superhero, but for me, Odinson is Thor. If someone else is going to wield Mjolnir, then I have no interest in that Thor. I have no problem with him relinquishing the throne to Valkyrie. That would free him up from his kingly duties to go on more adventures. Also, you already have a strong female Asgardian hero in Sif. I loved Jamie Alexander in the role, and I think she could more than carry a feature film as the character. And one more thing on that. Natalie Portman seemed to be tired of the role of Jane Foster and doesn't really want to play the character again. Now, if this is true, then her performance may suffer from her not caring about the character and her just accepting the role because of money. Now, we're also promised a Black Widow film. This seems to be about 6 years too little, too late, as, spoiler alert for Endgame, she was killed off in the last Avengers movie. How are we going to get invested in this character, knowing that she will have limited film appearances now that she's dead? Yes, I know they can bring her back, but I always hated this. One of the things I hate the most about comic books is their propensity to kill off characters and bring them back. I never read The Death of Superman, and I never will, because I knew it was some kind of a gimmick. And when I saw it happen in Superman Batman Dawn of Justice, I knew he'd be back in Justice League, which made his death scene null and void, not to mention boring. Now we come to the Eternals. I've never read an Eternals comic in my life. I know that each time they launched an Eternals comic series, it never lasted very long, and they should have made this group the TV series that failed and given the Inhumans, which I did read all the time, the big budget film treatment. But alas, the decisions were made, and now, I guess we'll see. So far, the only film I have any interest in from Phase 4 is Shang-Chi. However, as one commentator brought up, I forget who it was, this character isn't a well-known character outside of the Marvel Universe. So what appeal does the average filmgoer have to see this film if they don't even know who the character is? Even people who don't read comics have a vague idea who Captain America and Spider-Man are. Now, don't get me wrong, my friends, I want to be optimistic, but I don't see a lot of big box office receipts in the next 2 years for Marvel films. Oh, they'll probably make money, not do as bad as, say, Dark Phoenix at the box office, but don't look for them to make much more than Apocalypse, whose receipts are lackluster for a Marvel-based film. That leaves us with the DCEU. Could this be where Warner Brothers takes over the superhero box office after years of mediocre reviews and box office? They finally seem to be learning from their mistakes, coming into their own with the success of Wonder Woman and Aquaman, the latter of which is the first superhero film based on a DC character to make over $1 billion worldwide. Now that Marvel is taking chances with less than stellar characters and pandering to woke politics, can DC finally surpass its Marvel counterparts and quash the competition? One would think so, but then they cast Robert Pattinson as Batman. Yeah, the most boring vampire to ever grace the silver screen as the Dark Knight. Oh my goodness. Now, I'm willing to give Pattinson the benefit of the doubt and won't judge his performance until I actually see it. And in his defense, he has stated that he never liked playing Edward Cullen and only did it for the money. So maybe he'll take the Batman role a bit more seriously and put forth some kind of an effort, more good work in the character. But right now, I'm not enthused for the next Batman film. Outside of sequels to Wonder Woman, Aquaman, and the Black Panther, I'm not really seeing great box office for superhero movies in the next couple of years. Now, these words may come back to bite me in the ass, but I personally hope they do. But the landscape is looking bleak on the horizon. All right, fellow comic book fans, this has been Kevin Given. We're running out of time, so I just want to remind you before we leave. Once again, check out my columns and my comic book reviews on 2 sites, Comics for Sinners and Comic Crusaders. Don't forget to check out my own franchises, Carl Vincent Vampire Hunter and Adolescent Radioactive Samurai Platypi. Check out the Facebook pages for both franchises, and in the links below, you can click on and check out the latest trade paperback, which is Dracula Rising, plus t-shirts are available from Teespring. You can find all Carl Vincent and Adolescent Radioactive Samurai Platypi comic books on Amazon, Indie Planet, Comics Central, Comixology. Check them all out. If you like what you see, go ahead and purchase them. Check out my Patreon site, which I'm going to update soon. We're going to get some original layouts from my main artist, Rodolfo Ezequiel. You can check out how he does things, plus some original shows and programs that you won't find on YouTube. That's on my Patreon site, so check it out today. I believe that's all we have for today. Until next time, this is Kevin Given saying so long and keep reading those comics.